If you have recently experienced a death in the family, there's a possibility you've been called into probate court. And you might wonder, how did I end up here? And is there a way to avoid probate? Here to answer probate questions, our legal expert, Tommy Taneff. Tommy, nice to have you here.
Thanks, Gail. Thanks for having me back.
Let's start with a little explanation of what probate court is. It is confusing for folks, and sometimes they really receive that summons and there's a panic.
Yeah. Typically, the probate process involves the admission of a will to probate after someone passes away. And it's basically an administration of all their lifetime of affairs. You're collecting the bills, you're determining what debts there are, determining what assets there are, appraising the assets, collecting the assets, paying all the taxes, paying all the bills, and then making sure that all the things get distributed according to will or according to law.
It sounds like it's time-consuming, one, and can be expensive,
It is.
Drawn out. So are there ways to avoid it?
It can be expensive. It can be time-consuming. Of course, the easiest ways to avoid probate is spend all your money. Get rid of it.
I'll take it.
Or give it away.
Or give it away, okay.
In all seriousness, though, some of the ways that you can avoid probate include structuring your assets, whether you fund a trust, whether you set up your assets in joint tenancy with rights of survivorship, whether you set up your assets that are transfer on death, also known as TOD, or POD, payable on death.
If you have a will, could you still end up in probate court? Because your will state where everything's supposed to go, right?
You could. And then here's the thing, is you could have a will, and your will leaves everything according to your wishes, but then you go ahead and set up all your assets in non-probate tenancy and avoid probate by using TOD or POD accounts or beneficiary designations, and then those things don't pass according to your will. So if you decide to avoid probate
right,
and set up some of your assets so they don't pass through your will or don't pass through your probate, you could completely create an estate plan that's uneven. And I'll give you the perfect example. You have 4 kids, let's say. You leave everything equally to your 4 kids under your will. But then you have one account that you put one of the kids on as a joint tenant. That kid that gets that joint account does not have to share that money, and they do not have to go according to the will. Those are the pitfalls.
Is it best then to talk to someone beforehand to discuss all these things and make sure all those I's are dotted, the T's are crossed, so you don't end up in probate?
That's the biggest mistake people make, is they take a little bit of information, a little bit of knowledge, and they wreak havoc on their estate plan because they didn't consult with somebody.
And that's where you would come in, right? You could help people, guide them through that.
We could.
Now, what happens if they end up then in probate court? They can't really go to court without representation, can they?
It's pretty difficult. It is complicated, and it's pretty rare that somebody has a wherewithal to be able to navigate the probate process on their own.
Here's another question that I think people maybe rightly or wrongly assume, that only if you have a lot of money to distribute at the end of your death that you end up in probate.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
In fact, most people with average estates are the ones that end up going through probate. You know, almost 70% of people either don't have a will
or
haven't done any estate planning, and that includes lawyers and doctors.
Because they're too busy to really think about it now.
They're too busy working, and they don't want to put this stuff in writing, and they want to think about their mortality.
So before you leave, tell us really quickly what every viewer should do to avoid probate and to have things ready on the death.
Well, first of all, you talk to a lawyer that does estate planning, number 1. Number 2, if you're going to avoid probate, remember, joint tenancy with rights of survivorship, payable on death, transfer on death, or a trust. But the trust must be funded. Biggest mistake that people make.
And they can see somebody like you to help sort it all out, because it sounds like you need to do that ahead of time.
We can do that.
Thanks, Tommy. Nice to have you here. Good advice.